with Showtime leaving boxing, you have a lot of talk on the business of boxing, right? You have a lot of talk on, if only boxing could get to the UFC model of business, right? If only the UFC is such a success, it built this MMA to this humongous thing where it's a major sport now. And if boxing could just do that, it would have all these successes that the UFC has, right? It would do all these things that the UFC does. I'm not a huge believer in this, right? I actually think that the UFC product is very watered down. Now, the UFC product is very successful as far as business-wise, as far as money-wise, right? As much money that the ownership gets, the Endeavor, Dana White, all them, and as money, it prints money for them. So that's not what I'm arguing. But as a fan of a product and as something that I love, a sport that I love, I don't think that the best thing for something I love is boxing turning into the UFC. I don't. And I think that if you see what's happening this year in the UFC, this is a major thing that's happened this year, is that these fights are happening and there's no real buzz to them. Well, the UFC doesn't really care though, because the UFC just wants people to tune in and say, you trust the product. You may not know who's fighting. You may not know these guys. You may not even be invested in these guys, right? But you trust the product, so you're going to watch. That's fine. Business standpoint, right, for the UFC. As far as the sport, though, is that the best thing, right? Do these fights just happen, right? Do these fights just happen and there's no buzz for them? And there's very little conversation for them afterwards? And as boxing fans, all the things that we are complaining about boxing, are they actually like what makes kind of boxing great, right? Are these things that make these events feel special? I think the UFC doesn't feel as special as it once did. Because the model they have is, hey, just fight, right? You win, you fight the next guy up. And that's a good model. That makes sense. As far as a sport, that makes sense. As far as you live in NBA, NFL, you're trying to put it like that as one of those sports that makes sense. But the problem is you kind of lose the story of it, right? You kind of lose build up for it. You kind of don't let it cook. You kind of don't let it marinate. And in that boxing, that's kind of that's a touchy subject, right? It's a touchy term to say, oh, let's let it marinate. But MMA doesn't let anything marinate. UFC doesn't let anything marinate. It just gets right to it. Now, we just had a fight where Pereira wins his second bout in the UFC in 2 different weight classes, right? Kickboxer. Very little MMA experience. And he won his second bout in the UFC. It's almost unheard of. And then you had Aspinall become the first English heavyweight champ of the world in the UFC. And after the fight, what people wanted to talk about was a fight that was never going to happen. And it's literally a fight that is never going to happen. And that is Ngannou versus Jon Jones. Now, why do people want to talk about that fight? Why weren't they talking about Aspinall maybe fighting Stipe or Aspinall fighting Jon Jones, right? The reason we weren't talking about that is because they're going to get that. There's no reason to talk about that. That's going to happen. We'll just wait till it happens because it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. It's going to happen without us begging them or anything like that. Aspinall will fight the contenders. Now, Jon Jones and Stipe have to fight each other, then he'll fight the winner of that. And if they don't want to return, then he'll just fight the next guy up. That's just what's going to happen. There's no need for conversation at that point. What they want to talk about is a fight that's never going to happen. We know that for a fact. That fight is never going to happen. Ngannou's with PFL now, and Jon Jones with the UFC. And the UFC is never going to do business with PFL because it is in no business sense, doesn't make any business sense for them to do that. Because the UFC is not here to give you the best fight in the world. That's not here. They happen to be doing that because it was the most popular thing, but they're going forward. They do not give a damn who the best fighter in the world. They're not trying to settle that. They're trying to settle who's the best guy in the UFC. But people want to talk about that fight because that fight has controversy. That fight has intrigue. It has build-up. For a long time, Ngannou was the most dangerous man on the planet, scariest man on the planet, right? In the UFC. He was knocking people out. And he had Jon Jones, and he was always rumoring a move to heavyweight, right? Everyone was waiting for Jon Jones to go to heavyweight. And he was dominating light heavyweight. And they said the only challenge for him is the heavyweight. And then Francis Ngannou knocking people out. And you're like, wow, well, I wouldn't mind seeing this animal, Francis Ngannou, who's knocking everybody out, fight Jon Jones, who's technical and seems to figure everybody out, right? He seems to be the best in the world. And he's a genius in there. And he does all these tactics and adjusts his game for who he's fighting. I wouldn't mind seeing them fight. So it was a big fight, right? It was a big fight. A lot of buzz to it. Then Jon Jones said, no, I need to get paid Deontay Wilder money. Dana White said no. Then, oh, is John Jones ducking Ngannou? Build up, more buzz. Ngannou comes, wins the title, knocks people out, goes on a streak. And then Ngannou starts asking for money. And Johnson says, I will come to heavyweight now. And Ngannou says, well, I need my contract's up, and I need to be paid right. Not only do I need to be paid right, but everyone in the UFC needs to be paid better. They need to be taken care of. We need to have insurance for them, retirement, all these things that he was looking to improve for the fighters. UFC said no. They sent him packing. John Jones comes in, Beast gone. Ngannou goes, fights Tyson Fury. I think he should have got the decision. And now this fight has marinated, has cooked, and now this fight is a super fight. It's one of the biggest fights in the world that could possibly happen. And we will never get it. But that's all people want to talk about. See, in boxing this happens, and we're negative about it. Oh man, they let this cook too long, they do all these things. But that's what makes an event special. It takes time, it takes build-up, it takes people arguing about it. Now the problem with boxing is that sometimes these fights won't happen at all. It's not just build-up, it just won't happen. I mean, there's a chance that Haney and Tank never fight each other. That is a possible chance. That's the problem with boxing, is that these fights really possibly cannot just happen. But the great thing about boxing, and the thing that makes the event so special, is all the cooking and marinating that actually leads to a fight. Right? You have a guy like Bivol versus Berchevsky. If they would have just fought years ago, I think people are excited. It's a good fight. But maybe it's a lot like Berchevsky versus Wozniak, right? Where that's a good fight. It's hell of fighters, but I mean, a true boxing diehards were interested in it, but I don't think it got any buzz. I think right now, Bivol Berchevsky has the most buzz it could possibly get because people have been talking about it for so long. Been wanting to see it, and now, oh, maybe it could possibly happen. And now you got people debating all that. There is a build-up, there is things like that to build these events. That does have to happen. Tank Ryan, Ryan said, oh, I want to fight Tank. I want Tank. You tell him the Tyson podcast, Tank said he'll knock right now. They had the argument at the club. All these things, and people said, the fight's never going to happen. And then it finally got made. And it was massive. And it felt massive. And it felt important. Because it had been able to cook and get there, and marinate to get there to become a massive fight. Now, business-wise, as far as a company, yes, the UFC is doing just fine. I'm not here to say, oh, it's doing bad business. It isn't. It's obvious. But as a sport, as what I watch and what I enjoy, I'm not sure getting rid of marination, right? Letting things cook, letting these guys fight other contenders and build these big fights isn't what makes boxing pretty great. Look at Devin Haney, right? He's got big fights cooking with Shakur, right? And people say, oh, fight Shakur right now. It'd be a good fight. It'd be a good fight. Now, will it be the massive fight it'll probably be in 3 years? No, it will not. Right? And Haney's still fighting top contenders, still fighting really good guys. So it's not like he's just fighting nobodies and letting them get built up like that. No, I'm saying you have to do that. But you can fight the guys that maybe are top contenders, right? And build your name up. And then Shakur now, I think, who's after this De Los Santos fight, which even De Los Santos fight is pretty interesting, but fights guys like Lomachenko and Navarrete. And then at that point, that's a massive fight. And these are two guys that are going to be 100% ready for each other. Other than they just fight each other right now, which is a good matchup, but it isn't what everything it could be. I think the business of it is somewhere in between. But I think that people think, oh, boxing become the UFC. I don't think that helps boxing, because that's not what boxing is. Boxing lets the personalities build an event. The two fighters are the event. The UFC is the UFC's building the event. I think that it takes away from the events, honestly. I think just getting these guys fighting each other feels like, it's like eating at your favorite restaurant every day. I think you kind of begin to just take it for granted. It's weird to say because you're saying, oh, well, the guys are fighting the best constantly. But you do need that build-up. You do need that buzz. And I think this weekend showed it. People wanted to talk about John Jones versus Ngannou. A fight that could never happen. They weren't talking about who's Aspinall was fighting next. They weren't talking about if these guys were going to match up. They kind of knew the answer to that. They even talked about Stylebender versus Pereira at 205 pounds. Why? Because Izzy just said he's taking a break for a long time. He's also at middleweight. Pereira's now moved up. Now it's a fight that doesn't seem too likely to be next. But that, you know what's going to have? Chance to cook. You know what it has? History. You need that for these events. It makes these fights feel special, and I think that some fights can't just happen right away. They need the build-up and the buzz. Deuce.